Hello, everyone. Is our community the next Buddha? Is the title of our talk, and it comes out of a quote that I chose that speaks a lot to me from the Vietnamese Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh. And he said in one of his writings, "It is possible that the next Buddha will not take the form of an individual. The next Buddha may take the form of a community practicing understanding and loving kindness, a community practicing mindful living. And the practice can be carried out as a group, as a city, as a nation. This may be the most important thing we do for the survival of our earth." Oh, I'm going to go back, sorry. When I think of this quote, I think of leadership, and I think of leaders. I think of the Buddha as our ultimate image of positive, effective leader. Charismatic, visionary, inspiring, leading followers on to the creation of a better tomorrow. But this quote also turns our common notion of leaders and leadership on its head. Not an individual, but a community. I have spent my living and most of my adult life studying, teaching, and practicing leadership. And what I recognize about this quote is that it really does represent the ways in which we've come to view leaders and leadership in a changing way, both in scholarly ways and in practical ways. So, a quick lesson. If we look at the history of the study of leadership, we could see at the beginning, the earliest approaches looked at great men, literally, and their traits. It seemed obvious if these were great leaders, they must have extra special smarts. They must have an inborn ability to communicate and move their followers. But under scientific scrutiny and research, these myths evaporated. So then our approaches turned to behavior of leaders, right? So if it wasn't who they were, then maybe it was what they did. So the research and the common literature, the popular literature, focused on tools and techniques and tips, how to be an effective leader. So then we realized that leaders fall from grace. We began to see in very public, corporate and public scandals, political scandals, that leaders were not all-knowing and perfect. They weren't always positive. We began to see that maybe we needed to be skeptical about leaders and leadership. In a global information age where followers are now more empowered than ever and distrustful, scholars are realizing we need a new set of tools to be effective as leaders and to really understand leadership. So after decades of research then, what do we know? You might be asking yourself. Well, what we know is that in order to lead others, you have to be able to lead yourself first. That effective, positive leaders put their own self-development front and center. That they possess high levels of emotional awareness, self-awareness. And this comes from a long time of introspection and proactive reflection, and that this leads to high levels of emotional intelligence, the ability to self-regulate, the ability to align their values and beliefs with their intentions and their actions. We know that effective, positive leaders are persons of character, integrity, and deep self-knowing. So what we really have come to understand is that the practice of effective, positive leadership has very little to do with technical expertise and very much to do with a deep self-knowing, sort of mindfulness in action. Mindfulness, in case you haven't come across that term, is the practice of applying our awareness in the present to what's happening externally and internally. Mindfulness, the practice of mindfulness, has been shown by healthcare practitioners, psychologists, neuroscientists to be a positive and productive way to handle stress, to build resilience, to develop openness, to develop compassion, acceptance, creativity. What we know for sure is that if we are in the business of developing our next generation of leaders to sustain our communities, we must educate more than just their minds. We must teach them to apply their intelligence not only to their external environment, but to their internal landscape as well. We must teach them the tools of deep self-knowing. We must point them to their strengths. We must help them understand their values and beliefs. We must help them develop an awareness of the conditioned ways of thinking that hold them back. We must help them understand themselves so that they can understand and empathize with the experience of others. I have seen the transformative power of putting your attention on the development of the social and the civic side of students. I've been practicing it for over 10 years in my courses. Pointing students' attention to the importance of developing self-awareness and then giving them the tools to do it. And what I have come to understand is that it starts with the adults in their environment. We must lead the way. We must show them. And these efforts to lead the way and show them can't be individual and scattered and isolated. If we are as a community to be effective, we have to scale these efforts up. These efforts of developing self-awareness up as a community, collectively. Indeed, this might be the most important thing we do for the survival of our community, the survival of our Earth. As a college educator and administrator, I have seen the results of a lifetime of pointing a student's attention to the development only of their mind. More and more, I see students who are unable to make decisions, who are unable to adapt to new information, who are unable to persevere and struggle. More and more, I see students who are depressed, demoralized, lost, hungering for a life of meaning and purpose, hungering to understand more than just being able to chase the rewards, the grades, the GPA. More and more, I see students raised by our media, valuing the opinion of their peers above all else. But the situation is not hopeless. I don't believe we have to throw up our hands and say, oh, there's nothing that we can do, because I have seen the power of doing something differently, right? What I think happens as adults in their environments, we have almost been conditioned into a state of learned helplessness. That psychological phenomenon where when you begin to feel like you're out of control of the situation, you begin to behave in helpless ways. So that even if someone pointed you into the right direction, offered you an opportunity to change, you would not see it. You would ignore it. Or you might even outright reject it. I have seen the power of the fact that if we lead them, they will follow. We must guide and teach and care for them. They hunger for that. They hunger for the guidance. They hunger for the care. They hunger for a sense of belonging, for a sense to matter to somebody. They don't come to us fully actualized and developed. We must teach them. We must guide them. We must guide them to the path of self-knowing. We must guide them to the path of commitment for community. A great leader once said this: "Teach this triple truth to all. A generous heart, kind speech, and a life of service and compassion are the things which will renew humanity." If we don't take up this task of educating both the mind and the social and the civic side of our young people, other forces will. Forces that are not conducive to cultivating generous hearts, kind speech, and a commitment to a life of service and compassion. I call us to take up this task. Urgently, I call us to take up this task in our homes, in our schools, in our places of work, in our community at large. These are the things that will renew our community and make us socially sustainable. Can our community be the next Buddha, intentionally cultivating our next generation of leaders and citizens? I think we can. I know that we must. Thank you.